Well, like you say, my career's primarily been spent in visual effects production, but my real passion is in math and science filmmaking. As a storyteller, it's the ideas in math that I'm really drawn to. And I want to take this opportunity to share the approach I take in making my work with the example of my recent short Bugbottle. So maybe the first question I should answer is, why do I want to make math videos when there's so much more money and apparent prestige in doing traditional Hollywood effects? The reason is I feel that mathematics as a whole is grossly misunderstood by those outside of the math community. And not just the average person may not know how to solve a calculus problem, but so many people misunderstand the basic nature of what math is. And I'm saying this as someone who, when I went through school, I got good enough grades in math, but didn't really understand what I was doing. I could be able to find a correct answer to an equation, but I felt unable to do anything with it. If you want to use the analogy that math is a universal language, I felt I was learning a language I'd never be able to really speak. As maybe an example, if I were learning a spoken language like German, you could give me an infinitive of a verb like schmuckern, and I could be asked to conjugate it. I might be able to correctly say, ich schmuckere, du schmuckerst, sie ist schmuckert, and maybe even the more complex, ich habe geschmuckert, du hast geschmuckert, and I would be correct. What I'd be saying is correct, but if you said, what are you saying? I'd have no idea. The meaning behind those patterns was of no consequence. In my math classes, I was asked to essentially just blindly conjugate equations and ignore the fact that all this time I was holding an amazing tool for communicating compelling ideas. And it wasn't until I got out of the classroom that I began to have this spark lit inside of me about mathematics. And this was spurred on in good part by my work in digital art. I was finally able to have a creative application in my math and was working with numbers as a foundation for my art. Math became the clay and the paint I used to embody my creativity. And looking at the power of math, I see an immense potential for engaging an audience with these ideas that are overlooked and misunderstood by so many people. Math gives us a language to decode and understand so much of the amazing complexity around us. It can give us an amazing certainty that we can confidently hold as we just look into the infinite. Beyond personal engagement and empowerment with math, I see actually a more broad critical need for mathematics. I feel that we as a society are very poor consumers of information. You would think this overwhelming proliferation of knowledge we now have, it would have this utopian effect of making us all much more intelligent and enlightened, and it's done almost the opposite. I think we too often reject the work required for studying and reasoning in exchange for the comfort gained from easy answers that reinforce a simpler worldview. Now, this is a daunting challenge to face. I think when you ask people to look for logical answers that threaten their comfort belief, the basic comfort bubble, that's proven historically to not really work. And you could even say it may even go against basic human nature to do that. But I have confidence. I have faith in math. I have faith in the beauty of these ideas, that they can deeply compel an audience and be very, very appealing at a very personal level. Math can reach in and bring clarity to the seemingly impossible. And there's something fundamentally empowering and compelling about that. Seeing patterns and logical, predictable structures, that's an abstract mental exercise that goes to unlock the processes in science. And even if you don't comprehend all the vast depths of scientific knowledge, this is unveiling the mechanism for how science works. And that makes the world profoundly knowable. So that's why I have a passion for telling these stories in math. And I think math and science, to bring this into education, math and science are as much a method of discovery and thinking as they are a collection of facts. The process of scientific or mathematical discovery is often as important, if not more so, than the actual answers you get as a result of the process. And the same is true for learning. The discovery and exploration of a new idea gives a template for further discovery and is just as important, I think, as the empirical facts you get from that one lesson. So I think it's important we never lose sight in education that there's an importance in the journey itself, not just the end result from that journey. And I think the process of instruction too often falls into a template of reductionism. The topic is disassembled into a series of finite bits of information that sequentially build into what we presume is an understanding of that topic. And the problem with that kind of reductionism is that it strips ideas away from their relevance and their context. Topics become rote and expedient as the audience loses sight of what makes them beautiful and exciting. If you took this kind of approach in filmmaking, even the most compelling films could be made confusing and inane. For instance, you could say, hey, a young man in a desert gets a distress call from his sister. He finds an old man who knows magic and a man with a beast friend. They save his sister from their father, and the young man then blows up his father's giant spherical space station. Okay, that's all true. That actually is the story. But it's been reduced down with this kind of reductionism, so the audience is disinterested and confused. Doesn't make any sense. It's ridiculous to think that just simply being able to recite factoids about a topic equates to any kind of deep understanding of it. And it's critical to lead the path towards discovery, so they always understand and are being drawn into the plot. The basic tenets of storytelling also directly apply to education, to shaping a lesson. If you want to grab the audience's attention, it's important to, for instance, you have to quickly establish an initial conflict and build some kind of empathy for the players involved or an investment in some kind of a satisfying outcome. And the path forward can't be just an unimpeded straight line. That path needs to be sculpted and shaped by obstacles and overcoming conflict. The denouement in the end should have a satisfying resolution and perhaps leave the audience with something to reflect upon beyond just the confines of the story itself. And I don't see this as being just a trick to keep the audience's attention. I think this is just bringing light to what's compelling about these concepts and staying true to the nature of inquiry and discovery. So I realize I have my view up top here. Anyway, so I think when you create a lesson, it's important to strip away your own understanding of a topic. Currently, I'm dean of the visual effects program at the Noman School in Hollywood. We're a college which we focus on teaching artists for jobs in the film and game industry. And my responsibilities do include teaching. And in my lessons, I may be introducing foundational concepts to our students that are, I've been using for literally decades. It's not good enough to simply give them a dictionary definition of a topic or a recipe for how to accomplish a certain task. Rote memorization isn't enough. My students need an intimate understanding of the principles if they're going to be inventively harnessing these ideas to make their art. So before I can structure a lesson, even though I've known these concepts for decades, I have to strip all that knowledge away and see the concepts through their fresh, naive eyes. I have to go through kind of a hypothetical exercise of unlearning the material so I can build it back up from scratch. And I took this approach when looking at the topological structures in Bugbottle. I tried to identify along the way some common misconceptions and confusions that could arise and build upon that understanding. Basically, I was talking with my colleague, Konrad Poltier at the Freie Universität in Berlin, and he said that he felt there was no clear depiction of non-orientable closed fourth dimensional manifolds, especially one that would appeal to a novice audience. So I set out researching that, and like I say, deconstructing how it works, looking at it from a sort of fresh perspective and trying to unlearn it, going at the topic as if I had no idea what any of this was all about. So I came up with an idea, starting with an ant character for how to go about this whole process. So this ant character was going to be able to bring some life and personality into the narrative, as well as give us a point of view. So the ant can crawl around on a surface. We see the surface as being able to be deformed. And we immediately take the surface and enclose it up around the ant and trap him inside the bottle. So we've quickly established our conflict. Can we free an ant trapped inside of a closed bottle? And by making him hopefully kind of cute with big puppy dog eyes and tossing him around, we have a bit of sympathy for him and his plight. So we want to find an answer. So in any conflict, we have to define the rules. If you have a plot involving a superhero and you want to build drama around it, you have to clearly understand the abilities and weaknesses of the hero. In this case, the goal is for the ant to escape from the closed surface, which means you have to merge the inside of the bottle with the outside. The surface can have no holes, and even if he did have a hole, he can't cross over an edge. So to help give a little bit of, this whole concept seems maybe curiously impossible. How can you do this? So to begin to find a solution, what we're going to do is simplify our world a bit and remove a dimension. We're going to work to get the character to the other side of a two-dimensional surface. And again, he can't walk over an edge. So how can we do this? We're going to start by taking this surface and connecting it into a flat loop. Now, this is obviously a failed attempt. It doesn't work, but it kind of defines what's possible to do with our surface. We could take this surface and twist it into a cylinder, which again, this doesn't make a working solution. It's a failed attempt, but again, shows us what's possible of what we can do with this and begins getting us to think in different ways about this surface. So what we can then do with this sort of a visual vocabulary we're building, we can take our surface, put a 180-degree twist into it, and we can make a Mobius strip. And we can see the ant now walk around the loop. I also have a series of arrows I use to describe up and down orientations that I've edited that out for this. But again, it's building a visual vocabulary of what's possible and how to describe the surface. So we see we have what's called a non-orientable surface, that the orientation of the ant at one point could be up, at the same point, it could also be down. Now, the term non-orientable is one of the few pieces of terminology that we work with in this. And I only introduce it after the audience sees an idea that kind of makes sense, and we can now encapsulate it with this piece of terminology. Other terms such as manifold or normal vector, I kept those out. That may be essential if you wanted to further study these concepts, but this short film isn't the place to try to introduce those. So now we have this bit of a small victory for our ant. We worked through a simpler impossible task. We can push on to our main conflict of getting him to work inside, getting a non-orientable closed shape. So we want to take this flat surface and close it around our ant. So you can begin by bending that cylinder once, or bending the plane once to make a cylinder, and bending that cylinder again to make a torus. So we've made a closed shape. It follows the same logic that we made for the Mobius strip in some way, but again, it's a failed attempt. Now, since the Mobius strip had a twist in there, we can try putting a twist in the cylinder and then close it up. And once again, this is a failed attempt. But again, it's getting us to see things that are possible. Now, as opposed to thinking of what we did with the Mobius strip as being a twist, we can think of it as an inversion. We're inverting the surface. So if we think along those lines with our cylinder, what we could maybe do is work to invert the surface, take one end and kind of invert that inside out, and bring the other end around and through, and we've made ourselves a Klein bottle. And we can have the ant start here, he can walk through it and invert his surface. We have made a closed non-orientable surface. However, it appears like, well, one thing, you can see the up and down arrows. To bring this back to what we already know, we can take this and realize the path the ant takes along the surface is in fact a Mobius strip. There's our Mobius strip. However, it appears like we cheated in doing this. We've got this place where the surface passes through itself. And it looks like the ant, when he walks through this inversion, it appears he should just smack into the bottle. This looks like we've done something that shouldn't work. And we have to acknowledge that. We have to address that. If we don't, then we're basically asking the audience for acceptance and not understanding. Just accept this works. And hopefully this is also a place we can interject a bit of sympathy for the ant to mirror our empathy for the audience's potential confusion before we move on. So this place, it appears like we cheated. This is an important potential bit of confusion we want to leverage, because we want to acknowledge we're not working with typical 3D space. We're working in 4-dimensional space now. So what does that mean? Well, to help visualize this, we want to go back to our Mobius strip and see what we had to do to construct it. The flat loop we had to extend that up into a 3rd dimension to make our Mobius strip. There was no way to do that and keep it in 2 dimensions. A 3rd dimension gave us more room to maneuver. Now, if you take this 3-dimensional structure and look at it in 2D space, if you flatten it out onto 2D space, you're going to see a similar confusion with a 2-dimensional ant looking at this. A 2-dimensional ant sees this as a pinching dead end. This seems like it should not work as well. This seems like it's cheating in 2D space. So what we're doing here is finding a way to have a 3rd dimension solve potential conflicts in 2D space. This is mirroring our potential confusion in looking at a Klein bottle in just 3D space. So to see how an extra dimension can keep a Klein bottle from self-intersecting, what we can do here is flatten our 3D Klein bottle onto a 2D space. And we can extend it off into a 3rd dimension. And in doing so, we can pull it apart and keep it from intersecting itself. So again, a 3rd dimension is able to solve apparent anomalies in 2D space. And we're giving an appreciation for how we can use a 4th dimension to solve apparent anomalies we see from our 3-dimensional perspective. So we abandoned the, well, that was the first kind of structure we make, the Klein bottle. But in making that, we ignored the idea of twisting that we made the Mobius strip. So we go back to the idea of twisting and see what twisting might look like with a 4th dimension. We can begin with a flat circle, a 2-dimensional circle, twisting into a 3rd dimension to make a figure 8. And we can look at the shadow cast from this twisting and see how the 2-dimensional shadow isn't able to depict the full picture of what's happening. The shadow appears to pinch and pass through itself. So it looks kind of impossible. It's not showing us the full picture. So if we go up 1 dimension and look at a 3-dimensional sphere twist into a 4th dimension, we're seeing the same kind of weird result. The sphere passes to pass through itself from a 3D perspective. So the transformation seems impossible, but we can see this, how the pinching of the 3-dimensional sphere in 4th dimensional space mimics how the 2-dimensional sphere twists in 3-dimensional space if all we can see is the shadow. Once again, we're seeing how an extra dimension can resolve apparent anomalies because we're lacking a dimension in our perspective. So this new tool of twisting seems really amazing. And we have to further examine this. We have to see if we were to take a 3-dimensional sphere, twist it into 4th dimensions, has that made another non-orientable surface? It looks like it would be, but it doesn't. We can see that if we walk our ant around, yes, it has up and down orientations, and it can be sort of on the outside of the surface from our perspective, but it can't orient its, it can't change its orientation. All the normals stay unified and can't invert. And we have to acknowledge you can't jump across here. That seems like a logical solution, someone, but we have to acknowledge these pieces aren't contiguous. and you can't just jump across. We've established the fact the ant can now pass through surfaces, but we can't build the presumption that, great, now anything is possible. We have to make sure we're still defining how things are working. But again, the failed attempt is an important way to guide us in moving forward. So what we could do is now take a sphere, we could rip it in half and do our fourth dimensional twist on just one of the pieces. It can do that kind of weird inversion where in 3D space it appears to pass through itself. We can connect those, and we've made a crosscap now. And bing, there's our crosscap. And the ant can change his orientation along the surface. And once again, to bring it back to what we know from the beginning, the surface he walks to invert the path is a Mobius strip. So again, tying it back to establish things we know. I'd considered taking this sort of half twisted sphere and connecting it to other closed surfaces to show off how this half twisted sphere can kind of act as a non-orientability valve. And although this could have been really fun, offer some cool visual moments, such as making the ant surface itself non-orientable, I felt it would be kind of an unnecessary distraction and wanted to keep the overall plot focused and economic, and felt this would just kind of derail the story to take it off too far. So since all these non-orientable surfaces so far had a Mobius strip in their structure, the final approach was to see if we can take just a Mobius strip and close up the single edge of it. So to illustrate what we're trying to do, let's try the simpler task of closing up a cylinder into a torus. We can take some edges, pull those out, and extrude those along the edges to make a torus. Cool. Let's see if we can do that to a Mobius strip with its single edge. We try the same process on that and see, oh, wait, that doesn't work at all. But again, the failed attempts giving us some room to guide us forward. The single loop was impossible really to connect in this approach, but maybe if we had more loops, this could be more possible. So we can take this and make, as opposed to one loop, we can make 3. Now, to make sure there's no kind of magic trickery involved, this is basically a Mobius strip with 5 twists. It's got an odd number of twists, so it stays non-orientable, but all of this is kind of a folded up Mobius strip. So we can take this and we can close up the center 3 loops. Again, we've got kind of a visual vocabulary we built for doing this. And then we can take the edges and run those around and begin to close this up. And we can end up with the boy's surface. Okay, now since it wasn't as feasible to have the ant involved in this while it's being constructed, we can now go back in, we can add our ant in here, and we can show him happily walking along the surface to invert his orientation. So after researching and writing the script, I ran this past Conrad to kind of confirm its veracity. And but I knew the text alone wasn't really telling the full story, that simply just reading the script to a novice audience wouldn't be enough to bring clarity, because in many cases, the verbal information isn't the main thing telling the story, it's the visual information. So as I was writing this, I was also in parallel figuring out how I was going to construct these. And I wanted to make sure that these two, the two means of communicating information could be in sync. So the two things, the verbal information, how long it takes to read something in the script, and how long it takes a visual to develop, those have to be in sync. I can't rush one to facilitate the other. So I might have to do something in the script that's a bit more long-winded and reiterates topics to give time for the visuals to develop. So before I lock down the script, I need to know how long it takes to read everything and to show everything, so it can always be in sync and everything can fit together. I want to finish up here by talking about some of the technical processes behind making Bugbottle. All the software I used, everything I used for this was done in the Maya software, and I had to make all of the surfaces manually. I couldn't rely upon any kind of scripting because non-manifold polymeshes make a cascading set of horrible problems in the software. It just does not like it. So I had to make everything sort of manually. And I consider a lot of my visuals to kind of be like a ballet, which the audience can sit back and be entranced at the beauty and the flowing forms and be blissfully unaware of all the stress and searing pain that goes into making it. Since there was so much animation of this ant, I knew I could just spend months and months manually animating just legs walking around. I had to make a more kind of a procedural automated solution. So although I kept control over the ant at all time, the puppet is called a rig. I could always move the eyes, the head, the legs, however I wanted. At its root, I set up some procedural motion. So I could, the legs could automatically walk. I could animate one global position orientation of the character along a surface, determine the offset distance from one frame to the next, and play back a cycle of animation on the legs to match the speed correctly. So I would not have to animate him just walking. That could be more of an automatic process. I also incorporated automatic settling of his feet when he stops, balancing of his center of gravity, an inertial follow through when he starts and stops to avoid having to make these same kind of repeated actions just dozens and dozens of times. I also added in some procedural noise functions to control, like I said, to make his head kind of look around and the antenna wiggle, or his mandibles clicks. I wouldn't have to animate that. Again, just basic procedural purling noises and those kinds of things to drive his action. For the material property on the surfaces, I went with a frosted glass. I figured this would allow us to see the ant as well as any kind of interior structures clearly from the outside with these scattered refractions. We could tell what's inside, what's outside. It's all kind of visible. That had some challenges though. For one, transparent materials fade into the background. You can't see them. So that's always fun. Also, surface definition. One of the main things you use to define a surface.
Sorry,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt you, but if you could maybe finish within the next 1 or 2 minutes or so.
You got
and then,
it.
well, yeah,
I'm almost done. You don't get any diffuse illumination. It's all refraction or reflections. So I relied upon my experience doing car commercials and working with reflective panels and refractive panels to be able to make these things pop out from the background. And of course, as in any good story, you have to have a good conclusion. It's not rewarding enough just to see him inverting his orientation. You have to see him leap forth jubilantly off the Klein bottle. We've gone through an apparent impossible conflict. And I think the impossible is always the best route for telling stories. And hopefully along the way, we've introduced our audience into another dimension that has been entertaining. So thank you all.